is out as Homeland Security Secretary. The president said in that same post that he is nominating Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to be her replacement. I want to turn now to Nancy Cordes, our chief White House correspondent, who joins us from North Lawn. Nancy?
Major, after about 24 hours of speculation, the president, as he likes to do, just made the announcement himself via Truth Social, saying that he was going to be putting Markwayne Mullin, the senator from Oklahoma, in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, and essentially demoting, not firing, but reassigning Kristi Noem to what he described as special envoy for the Shield of the Americas, which he said is a new security initiative in the Western Hemisphere that he plans to announce on Saturday in Florida. This caps several days of controversy over an answer that Kristi Noem gave to senators in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing the other day, in which she was asked about a $200 million ad campaign starring her that she had produced as Secretary of Homeland Security, in which she urged people living here in the country illegally to self-deport. She was asked if the president knew that she was going to spend that kind of money on that ad campaign. She said yes, the president himself had signed off on it. Well, we began to hear through sources that the president hadn't signed off on it, and that he was, unhappy with the answer that Noem had given. She was already, we understand, on thin ice given the handling of arrests in Minneapolis, Minnesota, over the past couple of months, and then the president announcing just a few minutes ago, Major, that he is indeed replacing her, which is a major piece of news given how reluctant he has been to reassign or fire any cabinet level officials in his second term. As you know better than anyone, Major, he fired a lot of cabinet members in his first term, but this time around, he's been much more reluctant to do so. And
Nancy, we should underscore this will require a confirmation process for Markwayne Mullin, the senator from Oklahoma, because he's a sitting senator. That is assumed to be much more easy than someone who is not a member of the body. But we also should remind our viewers that currently, because of an impasse over DHS funding, the agency over which Kristi Noem used to oversee, and then Markwayne Mullin, if he's confirmed, will oversee, is still absent full fiscal year funding. That standoff continues. Correct. And some Democrats have already said this morning, Major, that it might be easier to negotiate a way out of this impasse if Noem is no longer at the helm of the Department of Homeland Security, if they are working with other officials, if they're talking to their colleague at this moment, Markwayne Mullin, who was dogged by reporters in the halls of Congress just today, said he hadn't spoken to the president, didn't give anything away. You're right that he will likely have an easier confirmation process because he is so well known to these senators. And of course, Oklahoma is a deep red state, which means that his seat is not necessarily in any danger of turning from Republican to Democrat, which is another reason that he was probably an attractive candidate for the president for this role. And just to cue our audience in on how this was such a fast-moving circumstance on Capitol Hill today, about 2 hours ago, reporters encountered Senator Mullin, and he said, I haven't talked to the president at all. I've got no comment on this. The president supports Secretary Noem. I support Secretary Noem. And then according to our email traffic, Nancy, by my vision, about 10 minutes before the social media post that came from the president announcing that Kristi Noem was out, Senator Mullin engaged with reporters again and said, I just talked to the president. And then, boom, announcement came. Yeah, and that mirrors the fact that the president has been talking to reporters this morning, as have some of his top aides, saying a variety of things as well, implying that he was not happy but hadn't made up his mind about what to do about Noem's leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, then indicate that he probably was going to fire her, and then culminating with this announcement that the president made on Truth Social that he is indeed moving her off of that role and to another one. Nancy, one other point to make. This is a personnel matter, and it's always of interest to the nation and the country when a cabinet secretary is sidelined. But there's a war going on in the Middle East. The Department of Homeland Security is the lead agency in monitoring and creating information for states and localities to deal with the threat matrix, which is clearly in a different posture than it was a week ago. And now it will be without a Senate-confirmed cabinet secretary.
It certainly will, and these are, even a fast-moving confirmation process takes time in the Senate major, and that's not to mention the fact that there are also positions open overseas as well, important ambassadorships in the Middle East that have not been filled, that we know have been slowing communication, as you would expect, between the U.S. and those countries. Things just move a lot more smoothly when you have ambassadors installed in countries that are very important. So, this creates another headache for the administration, even if they know who is going to hold that job eventually.
And Nancy, one last point. After the death of Alex Preddy, which came after the death of Renee Good on the streets of Minneapolis, the president dispatched Tom Homan, his White House immigration czar, and that was not a full-blown sidelining of Kristi Noem as DHS secretary, who was leading the charge in Minneapolis, but it was clearly interpreted in the agency and in Washington as pushing her out of the way and less in the spotlight. That was a sort of foreshadowing of the difficulty she was in, culminating in today's news.
Yes, and it has always been a sort of delicate situation because on one hand, there were those within the White House who were arguing that in Minneapolis, the aggressive things that Noem was doing and saying were at the behest of the president's right-hand man, his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller. And, and so she pushed back at that time and said, I was really just doing what I had been encouraged to do. And that's why, while she was sort of moved off of that assignment and kind of refocused on the border, there wasn't a move at that time to let her go. But one of the cardinal sins with this president is to say publicly that he did something that he insists he didn't do. And that appears to have been the final straw and what led to her being ousted as Secretary of Homeland Security. Really
grateful to Nancy Cordes for all the help on this. Once again, to reiterate, President Trump has fired Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary, giving her another job, intending to replace her with a new nominee, Senator Markwayne Mullin, Republican from Oklahoma. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7 on your local news, and of course tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report from New York. I'm Major Garrett. Good day.
We are following breaking news out of Washington. You just heard from Major Garrett there. President Trump has removed Kristi Noem as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Noem has spent the past 2 days on Capitol Hill as she has faced growing backlash over her job and handling of the Department of Homeland Security and particularly Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis. The president announced she would be transitioning to a new position, given the title Special Envoy for the Shield of Americas, which will apparently head up a new security initiative focusing on the Western Hemisphere that the president will give more information on this weekend. We should mention that Secretary Noem is delivering the keynote address at the Sergeant Benevolent Association Major Cities Conference. In a post on Truth Social, the president thanked Noem for her time leading DHS and announced he is nominating Oklahoma's Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin as the next DHS secretary. So let's bring back Nancy Cordes, CBS News chief White House correspondent. And Nancy, you were talking about this with Major, but let's go ahead and go into a little bit more detail here about really maybe what was the straw on the camel's back. And that was in one of the days of testimony, Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana asking Noem, how do you square cuts to DHS and contracts with the fact that you have spent $220 million running TV advertisements that feature you prominently in it? Noem replied that the president tasked her with getting the message out to the country and putting commercials out. If they were in the country illegally, they needed to leave. And clearly that was something the president took issue with.
Right, because she went a step further. And when she was asked, well, did the president know that these ads were going to cost $200 million? She said, oh, absolutely, he knew. And that's what the president is now telling advisors and reporters is incorrect. He said he didn't know how expensive it was going to be. But I do think, Lindsay, that while that was the straw that broke the camel's back, I think you could get a sense from more broadly the reaction to Kristi Noem in those hearings from not just Democrats, but from some Republicans, that she was really on thin ice. The fact that Tom Tillis of North Carolina was basically yelling at her, telling her she's a terrible leader and that she shouldn't be a cabinet secretary. The fact that John Kennedy, who's a big ally of the president, was willing to question her that aggressively about this ad campaign in the first place, all of that is a sign that they believed that she was pretty vulnerable, and that even perhaps they believed that the president was okay with them putting her on the spot because he wanted to see how she would respond.
So this was almost like a test. I mean, why was the Tom Tillis interaction so significant to you if he's kind of been on the outs with the president and, in fact, isn't even running for re-election?
Yeah, I think it was simply the fact that he stated so clearly and forcefully what Republicans have said behind the scenes, which is that he just doesn't think that she is capable of leading such an important agency at such a delicate time. He just came out and said it. You know, he's been critical of the president before, but, you know, he was practically yelling at her. And, you know, and that wasn't the only controversy. There were also very aggressive questions put to Noem by Democrats, both in the Senate and then at a subsequent hearing in the House, about her relationship with Corey Lewandowski, who is kind of her right-hand man at the Department of Homeland Security, but who lots of signs point to her being in a romantic relationship with him as well. And she was put on the spot about that. Corey Lewandowski is someone who has a long relationship with the President of the United States, was a major player in his first bid for the White House. And yet there have been questions about how appropriate it is that she is working with someone who is, for all intents and purposes, a subordinate who she may also be in a romantic relationship with. So it was kind of the combination of all of that. And, you know, the clips of those questions at the hearing going viral that really hurt Noem, especially at a time when she was already under such scrutiny for the department's handling of the situation in Minneapolis, where 2 American citizens were killed.
Okay, Nancy, stand by if you can, because the secretary is speaking in Nashville. Let's go ahead and listen to a little bit.
We also cover FEMA. FEMA is a disaster response agency, but it also is the agency that's entrusted to run the government on our very worst day. If we had a tragedy in this country where we needed someone to step up because our leadership was not able to, that agency would be entrusted to do that and to maintain our critical infrastructure. So they ensure that they go forward and maintain our electrical grid and our critical infrastructure such as water and systems that we rely on every day to help the American people be safe and to still have their way of life. We also have CISA, which some of you may have worked with them, which is our cybersecurity agency, which goes out and not only hunts down bad actors that would attack us on our cyber systems, but also gives us mitigation measures for how we can harden our systems. All of these entities work together to serve the American people and to make sure that we're prepared for any threats that we may face, but also respond to them in a way that honors what our ideals are. The sacred duty of our government truly is that people are entrusted to secure the rights also of all the American people. You know, the Declaration of Independence states that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, which is the people. The people give us the right to do our jobs each and every day. And as long as this world is fractured and as long as human nature is fallen, we will need brave men and women who step up and serve and enforce our rights and our laws and our values. And that's what all of you do in this room with your colleagues. The heroism was on full display this last week when we saw the attack in Austin, Texas, and we saw that the first responders that helped protected people and more lives there were our law enforcement that responded immediately. Instead of running away, they ran to it. And though we lost 3 lives and saw many other people injured, they prevented so many other lives from being lost. We're very grateful that they are willing to do that and to serve in such a way. In fact, it reminded me of the quote that is often attributed to George Orwell that states, "People sleep peacefully in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalves," which means You step up in order to protect people, and you do it in a way that other people often are never going to be required to. When tragedies like what we saw in Austin take place, it's your leadership and it's your decision-making that make all the difference. You use judgment, and people entrust you with their lives. You're on the front lines of leadership, and you have the responsibility of guiding and also shaping the next generation. So we thank you for that, and we thank you for what you do. I know that I've met many of you in the room. I've had the chance to visit with you. I appreciate your wisdom and your advice as we continue to develop trainings and insight into how leadership can work together to make good decisions and to break down the silos between agencies so that we can work together more different, in better ways than we have in the past. And you know we're seeing challenges across the country from judges and courts that are working to stop some of our efforts, that are looking to take away some of the protections that you need in law to do your work. And then also we're seeing some challenges from sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. In fact, after I get done sharing a few more words, I want to hear your questions on ways that we can help you do your jobs. If you're in a situation where the laws may be a little different than it is in other states, or you may have unique challenges that perhaps we could work together on to find ways to help you bring criminals to justice and to protect your community from public safety threats. America is the greatest country in the world, and it's the greatest country in the world that has great cities and great communities. Regardless of where people live, we need to make sure that they have an opportunity to go to work every day safely and to send their kids to school safely every day. Sanctuary cities do give us a challenge, because it makes it difficult at times for law enforcement to do.
All right, let's go ahead and bring back CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez as Secretary Noem continues there to speak in Nashville. I wanted to ask you, Nancy, and I need to ask my control room if we have the sound ready. There was a particular exchange between Democratic Senator Dick Durbin and Kristi Noem during this Capitol Hill testimony, and we do have it, and I want to play it.
How did you think that calling them domestic terrorists at that scene was somehow going to calm the situation?
You know, Senator, we are working in those situations where there's a tragic loss of life and that there is something that our agents are involved in, that we continue to deliver information.
Is it so hard to say you were wrong?
We continue, as these investigations continue to go, we will provide, I absolutely strive to provide factual information, and we'll continue to do that.
And when you fail, do you admit it publicly?
Absolutely. We always know that there's room for improvement.
This was a notable exchange to me at the time, and when we were talking about sort of the straw that broke the camel's back and we're parsing out what led to this was, of course, in reaction to the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis in Operation Metro Surge. And we know that the president's reaction, particularly after the killing of Alex Preddy, did not match what we were hearing from DHS.
Right. And I think that that just exemplifies the somewhat tricky situation that Kristi Noem was in, partly of her own making. On one hand, she was asked multiple times, not just by Durbin, but by other Democrats in the House and Senate, about the fact that she called Alex Preddy a domestic terrorist within hours of his death. And she, again and again, would not apologize, would not say it was a mistake, would not say that she had done anything wrong. And in that sense, she was kind of following the president's lead, which is never admit a mistake, never say you were wrong. And you know, we know from sources behind the scenes that she said actually she was given that language by the president's deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller. But at the same time, there was sort of an unwillingness to accept the reality, which is that it was very clear from the very beginning that this is not someone who was a domestic terrorist. He is now dead. Why is she now not saying that that was a mistake? All she would say was, we're now investigating, so I can't say that he wasn't a domestic terrorist because we're investigating. Well, then why did you say he was a domestic terrorist if there was an investigation that hadn't happened yet? So, you know, that exchange and so many others went viral for a reason, because she wasn't providing sort of the common sense answer that a lot of senators and House members were looking for.
One more quick question to you, Nancy. Do we know anything about her new role that he is going to apparently divulge more information about this weekend?
So all we know is the title, Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas, which the president says is going to be sort of a new international working group that's going to involve a lot of Latin American countries that is going to meet this weekend for the first time in Florida. So it's obviously a demotion, and it sort of brings to mind the president's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who was demoted. But similarly, the president didn't want to call it a demotion, didn't want to indicate that he had made a poor choice, and so instead reassigned him to be U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez, thank you so much. Let's bring in Capitol Hill correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. So, Caitlin, you had some reporting this morning of some reaction from Senator Kennedy regarding that ad and his line of questioning with Noem at this hearing, and that he apparently had heard from the president. What can you tell us?
That's right. There was an extremely notable exchange during that Judiciary Committee hearing on Tuesday where John Kennedy, a Republican conservative senator from Louisiana and a close ally of the president, pressed Noem on the agency's spending of over $200 million on television ads that prominently featured Noem. And he asked her whether those were effective in deterring illegal immigration and who approved the spending. And in that committee hearing, Noem, under oath, said that the president did. Now, after that, I spoke to Kennedy, and he told me that he was very upset about this kind of spending and had questions about whether the president had approved it in the first place. Fast forward to today, the president apparently called him, Kennedy said, after that hearing, and in Kennedy's telling, the two stories did not line up. Now, this is significant because as we've been talking about all of the kind of the lists of concerns that lawmakers up here have had about Noem, that exchange and the president paying attention to it seems, at least at this point, to be consequential. Now, I just was speaking with Tom Tillis, who's a Republican from North Carolina. You may remember him in that hearing. He was one of the first Republicans to call for Noem to resign. This is after Minneapolis. I just talked to him at length, and he said that her management was the issue here, that it's not personal, but that she showed that she could not handle this agency. I can also tell you that talking to lawmakers coming out of a lunch where they were just made aware of this news, they are very supportive, Republicans are, of their colleague who now the president announced will head DHS, Markwayne Mullin, a Republican senator up here. He left that lunch in the middle of it, and it appeared he appeared to be on the phone. So this is significant because he will have strong Republican support up here. They just need a majority, simple majority, to approve that. But this is going to be another confirmation battle up here on Capitol Hill to lead the agency at a time where there is no agreement on funding for the agency. So a lot of layers here, but bottom line, that exchange earlier this week with a Republican senator was very consequential when you're looking at the timeline of all of this.
What else can you tell us about Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma?
That's right. He's a Republican from Oklahoma, served in the House, serves now in the Senate. He is well liked by colleagues. He is a prolific presence on television. He is on air frequently as well, and a close ally of the president, campaigned for him as well. You can see on your screen there. He told our Alan Key earlier this morning he was kind of tight-lipped about all of this. A lot of people we've been talking to up here were learning information as it was being reported out. He told our Alan Key, our Senate producer up here, that earlier today that he had confidence in Noem as long as the president did. And that was kind of echoed by lawmakers we've been talking to, asking if they had confidence in Noem. And their line was, well, she serves at the pleasure of the president. So it is notable, that kind of line of phrasing. So that was starting to give us some clues as to, this will be in the president's court here.
I mean, look, this just happened, but have you heard any reaction yet on Capitol Hill?
I was just talking to a Democratic senator from Maryland. I asked her about whether this changes the dynamics in terms of funding for DHS, and she told me no, that they still have serious issues with the way that the president is running immigration enforcement, that the buck stops with him, not necessarily Noem. So that's what we're trying to report out now. Does this change the fight over DHS funding? Because remember, Democrats had said they're not going to support long-term funding for the agency unless reforms to ICE are put in place. Those negotiations are really at a standstill right now. And there was a thought that perhaps if Noem were ousted, that could change the dynamic. At least in the early reading, my early reading from talking to Democrats right now is that is not shifting the conversation. We'll see what happens as they respond to the appointment of, or the nomination, I should say, of Markwayne Mullin.
Caitlin Huberns, thank you so much. Let's go to CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga in our Washington bureau. Nicole, have you been tracking any reaction from inside the department yet?
Yeah, we're told that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security does know and did get a small heads up regarding the president's decision. There were some last-ditch efforts last night, both between her and also her de facto chief of staff, Corey Lewandowski, to try to make amends and reach out to the White House, and in particular, the President of the United States. Clearly, those last-ditch efforts unsuccessful here. But really, it doesn't come down to just one thing, Lindsay. Of course, the tides began to turn in the aftermath of the fatal shootings of Renee Good as well as Alex Preddy, and the overall handling of Operation Metro Surge in the Minneapolis area, which was overwhelmingly unpopular. But there have been a number of events leading up to this moment, including that $220 million advertisement campaign and the controversy surrounding it that Caitlin Huey-Burns mentioned earlier. Obviously, the president telling reporters that despite what the secretary testified before lawmakers on Capitol Hill just yesterday, he did not personally approve that expenditure on the part of the Department of Homeland Security. And that is a lot of money for an administration that has been preaching really cost-saving measures. In addition to the bruising week of congressional hearings, DHS is also currently in management turmoil. We have seen a lot of departures, a lot of changing of the guards in CISA, the nation's top cyber security agency, just changed its acting director. There has been a lot of leadership changes within the immigration components, including Chief Bavino's demotion in the aftermath of Minneapolis. Tom Homan, the chief border czar, took over after that. He is largely perceived to be an adversary of the secretary. It's sort of an open secret that the two do not see eye to eye. So that sort of triggered a changing of the guards within the department, and this was the sort of eventual fallout that we all saw coming. We should note that there was some hesitation, we're told, on the part of the president and GOP lawmakers who he spoke with in the run-up to this decision to make this kind of move right now. We are in an ongoing war with Iran. There are a number of Homeland Security concerns, not only with lone wolf attacks here in the United States and the height environment, or the threat environment, I should say, increasing here, but also cyber incidents. We've seen the ICRG target DoD contractors. And of course, there's the ongoing Department of Homeland Security shutdown. Right now, the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, many personnel furloughed, not being paid. And so this is sort of a moment of turmoil for this department. To now remove their only Senate-confirmed leader at the helm really throws this department, the third largest in the United States government, into further disarray.
You mentioned it's an open secret that Noem and Homan don't get along. Do we know the beef between the two?
Yeah, I mean, this dates back to early on in this administration. The secretary at least has put on a good face when discussing Tom Homan in public settings and his leadership. But our understanding is that the two largely don't see eye to eye when it comes to immigration enforcement operations. Secretary Noem tended to lean more on U.S. Customs and Border Protection and CBP, and Bavino in her operations tending to get her orders directly from Stephen Miller. We know that Tom Homan has been a long-time leader within ICE and served as a law enforcement official himself in several administrations, and that, the two often butt heads when it came to decision-making within the department. Now, what kind of role Homan will play moving forward, I think, remains to be seen. We do know that the heir apparent here Senator Mullin is widely liked within, it seems like, the Department of Homeland Security. Sources I've been speaking with today understand that he is a hardliner on immigration and, have welcomed this decision for whatever it's worth. We will see how that dynamic plays out with Homan taking on a sort of a new role in leading immigration operations nationwide.
Okay, Nicole Sganga, if you can hang out with us for a bit. If you have to go and continue to newsgather, we understand. But let's go back to Nashville, where Secretary Noem is speaking in front of the Sergeant Benevolent Association Major Cities Conference. She has been taking questions from attendees, but she has not yet addressed her reassignments. Let's go ahead and listen for a couple minutes.
Pursuing in Hawaii would be through our TSA officials, and then also we have CBP there, of course, because of all the travel back and forth and individuals. CBP is the largest law enforcement agency that we have, one of the largest in the country, and it does all traveler information internationally, and so I'm sure that you're interacting with them quite often. So we don't, as far as targeted operations, you may see a presence in Hawaii if we know specific individuals there. And we are tracking and have signed security agreements with other countries. I think since I've been Homeland Security Secretary, we've signed 27 different security agreements with other countries to share information with us. If they have a dangerous individual that they think maybe has traveled into the United States, we will share those databases with each other. They share theirs with us so that we know when some of these individuals are coming into the country. And that may be, I'd say, the vast majority of the interactions you'll see in Hawaii. If you've got some suggestions for us or experience, I'd sure love to hear.
We'll definitely do that. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Yes, sir.
Hi. My name is Jeff Wader. I'm the proud president of the Rochester Police Locust Club, located between Buffalo and Syracuse. And just a shameless plug, go Bills.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
So I used to have, my T of O is 728 officers.
Okay.
I'm currently down to 594. And I had two more come in the other day that they're retiring. And we have a very, very difficult time retaining our members, but also hiring. And I know this is a issue throughout the country, especially in larger communities. My question to you is the federal government and or the Trump administration, are they able to provide bonuses for retention and bonuses for hiring incentives to start building back our staff?
All right, let's go now to CBS News, the Executive Director of White House and Politics, Finn Gomez. Finn, your reaction?
Well, Lindsay, I have been talking to some of my sources, and one thing, following that exchange that Caitlin Huey Burns spoke about on the Hill, where the DHS Secretary Noem and lawmakers really really testy exchange over the 200 million plus ad campaign. I have confirmed through my sources, by two sources, that there was a very contentious phone call with Corey Lewandowski, the top advisor to Noem. It was with him and with the president following that exchange on the Hill. According to my sources, it was very acrimonious and quite contentious of a conversation. I don't have specifics about what was discussed, but it was specifically related to that exchange with Noem and lawmakers on the Hill during the testimony.
Was it about their rumored romantic relationship or about the ad spending?
Well, it was, my understanding was about the ad spending in that exchange. I don't know all the details within the context of that conversation. There has been rumors and reports about an alleged personal relationship between Lewandowski and Noem. I will say that Lewandowski has been adamant that it's not true. In fact, Noem herself said during multiple questions about that during her testimony that she referred to it as like tabloid garbage or something to that extent. So they have denied, at least Lewandowski has denied that straight out. But it's something that has persisted for a couple years, and we have been hearing, and it's been part of the chatter within Washington. I have not confirmed that, and I can just go off what has been reported and what and their denials, of course. But we do know there was quite a fiery security exchange between the president and Lewandowski. Lewandowski, of course, goes back with the president back to 2015, where he was the co-campaign manager during the 2016 presidential cycle, in that successful bid by the president to win in his presidential campaign in that presidential cycle with Lewandowski and David Bossie at the helm. Lindsay?
Is it your understanding, though, that Lewandowski is still in his position at DHS?
That's a good question. I have reached out to Lewandowski. I have not heard back yet on that. But, however, we do know that they do have at least a very strong professional relationship. Obviously, he's her top advisor by all accounts, and because of that, they're really tied. So I don't, it's an assumption here. I can't confirm it, but the assumption is because of that relationship, that it's unlikely that he would remain as she now goes. So I really doubt that Senator Mullin would continue to keep him on as well. Senator Mullin is really interesting. I know that Kaylin Huey Burns spoke about him, but he's someone from as been reported. He's a junior senator from Oklahoma. He's a former plumbing company owner. He's also someone who has a very hardline perspective on immigration, a very close ally to the president and to the White House. And also, interestingly enough, he's a member of the Cherokee Nation, one of the few Native Americans serving in Congress. Lindsay?
For those of us who remember the first Trump administration, this is a bit reminiscent. We have not seen the kind of turnover in the second administration that we saw with the first administration.
Great point.
Really until now, but this is very significant.
No, to that point, like I did cover all 4 years of the first Trump administration, and there was a lot of this sort of upheaval that you saw then. A lot, 6 months, and they would change the chief of staff. Reince Priebus famously defenestrated by tweet by the president then. But this time around, you really haven't seen that much. Of course, we saw that with Waltz, of course, the former NSC head of the NSC National Security Council, who's now, of course, representing the United States at the United Nations. He was President Trump's pick for that. But that really you haven't seen. That was not a cabinet level position. But with Noem, this is the first major move by the president. Really, we had been hearing. I had been speaking to senior White House officials this year that there was there had been this growing sense within the White House that Noem was becoming more of a problem, at least optically and externally, for the president as he tried to implement his hardline immigration policy that he campaigned on, and it was becoming more of a distraction. I know we've already reported this, but following the events that occurred in Minneapolis, there was more of a pronounced internal consensus that there had to be a change at the head of DHS. And I think there was a sense that the writing was on the wall. I'd been hearing that in some form for weeks. I know also Nicole Skanga, our great correspondent at DHS, had also been hearing that. So I think it was, I think that the testimony on the Hill from this week was really the final straw, Lindsay, and that's why you saw this big move by the president to try to correct this.
All right, Fin Gomez, thank you. We will come back to you again in this half hour. But for anybody who's just joining us, we want to remind you we are following breaking news out of Washington. President Trump has removed Kristi Noem as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Noem spent the past 2 days on Capitol Hill answering questions from lawmakers, at times taking part in very testy exchanges with lawmakers over her job managing the Department of Homeland Security and the president's immigration crackdown. Now, the president said on Truth Social she will be transitioning to a new position and given a title we learned about in that Truth Social post, Special Envoy for the Shield of Americas, which he says that he will be giving more information about this weekend, a new security initiative focusing on the Western Hemisphere. And Secretary Noem is in Nashville right now. She's delivering the keynote address at the Sergeant Benevolent Association Major Cities Conference. And this is a live look right now at that Q&A with attendees. But to our knowledge, she has not yet answered any questions or addressed her reassignment, though we did hear Nicole Skanga report that she was given a heads up about this. And so she is aware of the change in her title. And we know that Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin is going to be taking the helm of DHS next. So let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez again to bring us all up to speed on the various things that led us here, if it can be reduced to just a few things.
Hey, Lindsay, good to see you. Well, definitely the precipitating event was Noem's testimony on the Hill this week, at which she was asked specifically about a $200 million ad campaign featuring her in a variety of settings in which she urged people who were living in this country illegally to self-deport. She was asked,
do we have that? Sorry, Nancy, you keep going.
Yep. Sure. So she, she was asked about that staggering sum, and she argued that this was right in line with the president's priorities. And then she was asked point blank, well, did the president know that it was going to be $200 million? And she said, yes, he did, that she had talked to him about it. And apparently the president does not recall that conversation and insists that it never happened. And so that irritated him. And frankly, that began to leak to reporters that he was not happy about her testimony and that he disagreed with what she had said. And things rolled very quickly from there. We were hearing just this morning that he was mulling letting her go. And then he announced it himself via Truth Social, not that he was firing her, because he has been quite reluctant in this second term to fire anybody at a cabinet level position. But he did say that she is moving on to be special envoy for the Shield of Americas. And we're still learning exactly what the Shield of the Americas is going to be and what the special envoy's role might be.
Do you have any sources that are saying that the tone could change at DHS with a change in leadership? We saw the fallout from Operation Metro Surge. We saw, I believe it was called Operation Catch of the Day in Maine. That lasted all of 24 hours or something like that, with Senator Susan Collins saying that it had been called off. We know that the immigration crackdown is one of the key tenets of President Trump's platform for his second administration. But do we have a sense that things will operate differently in a post-Noem era?
I think it's really hard to say because, as you alluded to, there were a lot of things that she was doing that were exactly what President Trump wanted and that were at the center of his agenda. He wanted DHS to be aggressively urging people to self-deport. He wanted DHS to be surging ICE agents into cities to round up people who were living in the country illegally or had criminal records. So, some of the very things that made her a lightning rod were also the things that President Trump had hired her to do. So, the question is, will Markwayne Mullin, who it appears will be succeeding her once he is confirmed by the Senate, he is currently the senator from Oklahoma, is he going to change direction? We haven't heard from the Trump administration that they're looking for a major change in policy, though they did retreat from some of those very aggressive tactics that we saw unfolding in Minneapolis after the deaths of those two U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, for obvious reasons.
Nancy Cortez, thank you so much. Let's go down to CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall, who joins us from Capitol Hill, where I'm sure the halls are abuzz with this latest news. But Hunter, before we get to the latest reporting that you are gathering, we did hear from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Democratic side. Let's go ahead and hear from him.
Mr. Leader, some Democrats are saying that they think this might make it easier for your negotiations on.
That's up to them. They've been stonewalling us.
But you're in the negotiations.
They've been stonewalling us on the most important issues, and those have to change, and they have to change them. We have to change them by legislation, because any one person, I don't trust any one person being in charge of this agency as long as Trump is president, given the policies he's espoused, given how ICE has been structured. The rot is deep.
Does that mean that Democrats are going to block any nominee from getting through?
As I said, he's got to change the whole policies in ICE. It transcends. It's not a personnel issue, so I wouldn't focus on that.
So a legislative fix has to come before you.
All right, so Hunter, if a look says 1,000 words, that look he gave to that reporter who was interjecting certainly did with that icy glare. But catch us up to speed on where we stand on this funding debate.
Well, Lindsay, I think everything that's playing out here, obviously, we're still seeing this standoff continuing about how, Democrats, they have a little bit of leverage here in this battle about how to fund DHS. Now, obviously, everything going on overseas has cast a little bit of pressure on Democrats to help Republicans on something. But what we're watching here clearly, especially with the news today from the president saying there's going to be this change in leadership at DHS, it does add a new level of scrutiny. Democrats are obviously very upset with how the Department of Homeland Security has conducted itself, has conducted operations during the Trump administration. And we're watching at a point where Democrats' voters, their base, really want to see Democrats fight back more. So when now Democrats are going to have an opportunity in a Senate confirmation battle about the new DHS secretary, or the next nominee of the DHS secretary, Markwayne Mullin, the Oklahoma senator, to really raise questions, raise concerns. And that's coming just at such a critical time after, obviously, all the tumult we saw in Minnesota and the deaths of 2 American citizens.
What other reaction are you tracking?
It was notable as I came over here to get in front of the camera. I was one of the reporters who Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi was speaking to. There's a certain level of just unexpectedness here. Obviously, Secretary Noem, the DHS secretary, had faced a lot of scrutiny and questions, as you've outlined earlier in this program. But Roger Wicker, the Mississippi senator, told me he was actually just at lunch with Markwayne Mullin, the Oklahoma senator who President Trump is picking to be the successor to Kristi Noem. And he said Senator Mullin was at lunch, got up abruptly, left a full plate of food on the table, and that just kind of shows perhaps how unexpected this is and how unknown this was before today.
How typical is it for the president to announce these kind of personnel changes via Truth Social?
Well, you pointed out earlier, this does feel very reminiscent of the first Trump administration during the president's first term. There is this level, obviously, of the president is unpredictable. The president, does seem to have a sense of when public opinion may be turning against things. And I think especially you're going to hear a lot, obviously, about the contentiousness on Capitol Hill between lawmakers, including Republican lawmakers and Secretary Noem, but also just given how much scrutiny was on DHS after what happened in Minnesota in January, it's reasonable to think, obviously, that the president was listening, hearing what was going on across the nation, and that might have had an impact on what we saw play out today.
Give us an idea of how these two concurrent fights, one over funding and one now over confirmation, will likely go there on Capitol Hill.
Well, Lindsay, that's the thing. It's hard not to see these two things linked. Obviously, they're two entirely separate measures in terms of, one's a funding measure, one would be a confirmation battle over an appointment to the administration, or a confirmation to the administration. But they're obviously going to raise questions about DHS. It's going to give lawmakers more of a chance, especially in the Senate, to have their say, have their moment, to highlight concerns that they have. It's going to be interesting to see. Again, Roger Wicker, that Mississippi senator that was speaking to reporters a few moments ago, he told us that he thought, Markwayne Mullin would be able to get confirmed, and he would miss him, obviously, in the Senate. So Republicans, you think, will likely get behind Markwayne Mullin, the Oklahoma senator, as the next DHS secretary. Republicans control the Senate. They don't really need Democrats' buy-in in this confirmation process. But you do think that Democrats will obviously be able to raise concerns. They could slow it down. This could drag on for a lengthy amount of time, and that could raise more scrutiny and, more calls for transparency at DHS.
All right, Hunter Woodall, thank you so much. Let's go back to CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga, because Nicole, at the same time that we have been seeing this ramp up, this crackdown on illegal immigration, and we have seen these incentives for people to self-deport, we have also seen the ranks try and fortify and build up. And with that has come criticism, including from a whistleblower inside DHS, that maybe corners were being cut in terms of trying to ramp up ICE staffing. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, ICE had set a very ambitious goal of hiring 10,000 new agents by the end of 2025. Now, that goal was not widely reached. There were approximately 4,000 new recruits that were put through training. But within the 7-month span since DHS announced this sort of recruitment and retention push, training dropped from 72 days to 42 days, and multiple courses, including classes that focus specifically particularly on use of force, on firearm training, were dropped in that process. And there were multiple whistleblowers, including a whistleblower, Brian Shank, who appeared before lawmakers on Capitol Hill to discuss some of those changes and to voice his own concerns. There was also a lot of concerns about the number of former law enforcement officers who were also joining the ranks of ICE, the fact that they had to only enlist in an online course that lasted just a few hours, that they were able to take a test as many times as they needed to in order to pass and join those ranks. And there was concern about the quality of the vetting of those candidates. And we had heard anecdotally about a few individuals who were taken out of training once officials determined that they had a criminal history or a record and should have not passed the screening to go down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Brunswick, Georgia, which is where ICE agents are trained there. I myself have visited that facility twice and have heard concerns from anonymous sources who were part of that training program about the ways in which ICE and CBP had continued to lower their standards in trying to recruit so many new agents and enlist them for on-the-ground training. And that, by the time those folks made it to places like Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and Chicago, they just really were not prepared to deal with not only immigration enforcement operations, but also some of the civil unrest that they faced once they got on the ground there.
That said, what do these operations look like now under new leadership? Are there any current active operations like Operation Metro Surge that we've seen since that came to an end? And do we think that the crackdown will be as aggressive now, given the fallout, given your extensive reporting on this issue?
Yeah, Lindsay, I think it remains to be seen, but I think that to say the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Kristi Noem learned a lesson following Minneapolis is a profound understatement. 2 Americans died at the hands of federal law enforcement, and no matter how she or others within the Department of Homeland Security have testified publicly on Capitol Hill, no matter how many questions they take regarding Operation Metro Surge, I think it has been abundantly clear in the eyes of the public that the vast majority of Americans disagree with how immigration enforcement policies went down in Minneapolis, even those who were initially supportive of President Donald Trump's campaign promise to deport the, quote, worst of the worst nationwide. And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Markwayne Mullin, senator from Oklahoma, the next DHS secretary, if he's even confirmed, does have a history of being supportive of immigration enforcement. He is considered a hardliner within the ranks on Capitol Hill, and his nomination by the president today has been, from what I've heard from DHS sources and Homeland Security, current and former officials, quite welcome in this space. Certainly I don't know that he'll take a far more softer approach, but if what we saw when Tom Homan took over Operation Metro Surge becomes, a precedent moving forward, you are going to see far more focused operations on the part of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, perhaps less deployment of CBP and Border Patrol to some of these cities, and instead they will remain focused on the nation's borders, the U.S.-Mexico border, where they have traditionally played a role. And, hearing from some within the ICE ranks, ICE has been asking for a while to do its job. There are concerns about the safety and security of ICE law enforcement and the way in which they've been conducting operations, really putting their own lives at risk. We know all the controversy regarding ICE officials wearing masks. There has been, a number of state and local initiatives to try to unmask those agents. So it'll be interesting to see how the new secretary takes all of that on, but no indications that there is another Operation Metro Surge underway right now. We do know that there are some lingering joint task forces on crime involving ICE and CBP personnel right now in Washington, D.C., where I am sitting, in Memphis, and in a few other cities. There is still a footprint in Minneapolis of about 650 federal agents. There is still a footprint in places like Chicago and Los Angeles of, federal immigration officers, but you don't hear the same stories that we had heard and the same incidents of U.S. citizens being detained at such a high rate, of protesters being targeted with pepper spray and with tear gas. So we have seen things quiet down just a little bit, but it will be interesting to see what city is next, or if instead what we see under the leadership of Tom Homan and the new secretary is a more focused approach to immigration enforcement, less of a concern about reaching a certain quota or making 3,000 arrests a day, which we know, Stephen Miller has long supported, the deputy chief of staff and the Homeland Security advisor at the White House. What role Stephen Miller will play moving forward will also be very interesting. We know that he was extremely close with Secretary Noem, that the two of them would be on the phone constantly throughout the course of the day, and that he oftentimes would instruct the secretary on what he wanted carried out in cities like Minneapolis. It's also very telling that she seems to have taken the fall here and not Stephen Miller.
Let's put a pin in that. I want to ask you about that a little bit more on the other side of this break, so stay with us. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness.
Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
God, you do your research. I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Do you believe this case could be solved?
Yes, I do.
What is your emergency?
I accidentally shot my wife.
Do you think it was accidental? I guess that's the million-dollar question.
It's not a violent crash.
No.
Whoa.
There's our connection.
Lady down.
I knew this was going to happen.
Did this look like an accident or something else?
Something entirely different.
I never would have guessed how this ended.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Watch now.
Here we go.
The ultimate tradition continues.
60 Minutes is here right now.
America's #1 news program is a free streaming channel. It's time for 60 Minutes everywhere you watch.
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity and formality and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who was a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you?
Oh, come on.
Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
It was almost like being face-to-face with the devil.
48 Hours reports.
I fought and fought.
911, what is your emergency?
She disappeared off the face of the earth.
Stream 48 Hours 24/7.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right.
A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
Go behind the scenes of one of TV's most watched true crime series with the 48 Hours Postmortem Podcast. Follow and listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
We are back with our breaking news of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem being ousted. Let's go back to CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall. You have some new reporting regarding Senator Kennedy and a conversation that he had with the president yesterday. Of course, Senator Kelly, with that infamous back and forth between Noem and that Senate hearing about that ad spending that she said the president knew about.
He asked me what I thought about Markwayne, and I said, A, I like him. B, he's very smart. C, he's a very good businessman. And D, if I didn't believe the three things I just told you, I'd lie to you because Markwayne would whip my.
Can you get a sense of, when you talked to the president, did you get a sense of how long he had been preparing to make this move?
No.
He had been at least days, at least till 2
I don't know. I didn't quiz.
So do you think that he's easily confirmable?
Markwayne? I do, yeah. I think he'll do a good job.
What does that tell you?
Lindsay, what we saw happen on Capitol Hill this week, obviously so much more scrutiny of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, including from Senator Kennedy there, obviously a Louisiana Republican. What this shows us is really notable because in the Trump administration 2.0, this has been a Republican Party that is much more in line with the priorities that President Trump has advocated for, much more so than after the 2016 election, obviously when some felt his win was a surprise, his rise was a surprise. When you saw the kind of scrutiny that Secretary Noem was drawing, not just from Senator Kennedy, but somebody like Senator Tillis, the North Carolina Republican, who's actually leaving office at the end of this term, it's really fascinating because that may signal, obviously, eroding support for Kristi Noem in the Republican Party, as we've maybe seen play out today. But it also just shows, obviously, running an agency like this is incredibly difficult, and it's incredibly difficult for somebody. Kristi Noem was the governor of South Dakota before she took over at DHS. This is somebody, obviously, she didn't have that D.C. experience so much from the Senate perspective. She had been a U.S. House member. But obviously, this is a difficult role. It was going to be a difficult role given, obviously, the remit that the Trump administration was giving to that role. I mean, I vividly remember hearing a Republican senator talking to folks right after the inauguration, essentially saying, you're going to have a lot going on. This is going to be a busy task for people involved in DHS. That was Tom Homeland on the Trump inauguration day. And that just tells you there's a lot of scrutiny here. There's a lot of tension here. There's obviously one where Republicans had no problem pushing back in some cases on Secretary Noem yesterday. And that provided a telling prologue to what we saw today.
I know that we don't know the ins and outs of the president's schedule, but does it strike you as odd that he was paying such close attention to this public testimony just days after striking Iran?
I think what's interesting, and I can't speak to obviously why the president may have been watching that, or if he was even, but what is telling is when you have that kind of pushback from members of your own party. Again, this Trump version of the Republican Party, they're so much more supportive of the president, even though they were back in this, let's say, the same point in 2018 during his first term. And when you see such a public example of pushback like that, that just tells you there's erosion, maybe not just amongst the base, maybe not just amongst members in Washington, but that level of scrutiny that can obviously reflect deep-seated tensions or concerns that senators have. And that really can be the kind of thing that erodes support for an agency, for an administration, and for a cabinet secretary, Lindsay.
All right, CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall, thank you so much. Just to catch everybody up to speed on the big news that we are following this afternoon, President Trump announcing today on Truth Social that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem would leave her role later this month. She has faced intense criticism that has reached a peak this week. He also announced her replacement. Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin will become the Secretary of DHS effective March 31st. The Senate is going to need to confirm him to that post. The president in his post said that Noem had served us well, citing her spectacular results on the border, and said she will be moving to a role as special envoy for the Shield of the Americas, which he says is a new security initiative that the administration will be unveiling. We, of course, will continue to follow this breaking news and bring you the very latest. You are watching CBS News 24/7.
There's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
60 Minutes follows author Mitch Albom inside Haiti to a refuge of hope, courage, and humanity.
Love, food, prayer works miracles.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se.
Why doesn't he tell Republicans, come into my office, let's hammer this thing out?
Margaret, it's a totally fair question.
Why are you opposed to this deployment?
It's unconstitutional.
That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
48 Hours, Saturday, 10/9 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. A teenager shoots 2 of his friends. Was it premeditated?
He knew what he was doing. He wanted to pull that trigger, and he did.
Or is there another explanation?
You think the acne medication puts you in a mental state where you could commit murder?
Yes, ma'am. 48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount+.
I want to know what's going on in the world.
I'm Tony.
You can't do that if you're just sitting in a chair reading about what other people have found.
What do you think of that? Why?
There are big questions that all of us are asking. I want to get you the answers.
How are you?
I'm Tony DeCopel. Join me on the CBS Evening News.
And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6th, 1981. I'll be away on assignment, and Dan Rather will be sitting in here for the next few years. Good night.
CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus.
CBS Mornings. CBS Mornings. CBS Mornings.
See you at 7.
I want a mug.
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you?
Oh, come on.
Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
Sunday morning, JFK's grandson Jack Schlossberg on his run for Congress, plus Ultimate Fighting Championship CEO Dana White, and coyotes on the prowl.
A woman is found murdered
Down here is where hunters had discovered the female in the ditch.
and is soon identified.
Whoa, wait a minute. That looks like Mindy.
Yet friends had learned the same woman passed from natural causes months earlier.
I had been told that she had died in the hospital.
How's it possible she died twice? 48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount+.
I want to know what's going on in the world. You can't do that if you're just sitting in a chair reading about what other people have found. You have to get out there and listen. By telling people about each other, you actually bring this country together. There are big questions that all of us are asking. I want to get you the answers. I'm Tony DeCopel. Join me on the CBS Evening News.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Lindsay Reiser, and here's a look at the top stories we're following. We continue to follow breaking news from the nation's capital. Kristi Noem out as Secretary of Homeland Security. President Trump says he will have a role in selecting Iran's new leader as hundreds of missiles fly in and out of Tehran for a 6th straight day. House Democrats hoping for more success than their Senate counterparts as lawmakers take up a new effort to force the president to go through them before continuing military action.